Hi, my name is Chaundra Bishop, coming to you from Urbana, Illinois, which is about 2 hours south of Chicago, which where I was born and raised. I live in Urbana with my partner Wayne and my sweet 5-year-old Yorkie Riley James. I am a cholangiocarcinoma survivor, so I'm here to share my story with you a little. I currently work in public health and have done so since I finished graduate school in 2013. I'm sure you can imagine the world of public health has been very busy this past year, and I'm grateful to have been part of the work being done in my community. And that sort of ties into my chat today about my cancer journey. My journey began the summer of 2016, around June, when I went in for my annual checkup with my primary care physician. I had no complaints when I went in for my appointment, so everything proceeded as normal. My labs came back and I got a call from the doctor's nurse who told me my liver enzymes were a bit high, but that could be due to a variety of number of things, and that the doctor wanted me to come in a few weeks to get the labs redrawn. I went back and the enzymes were even higher, and then a third time I went and they were higher still. She apparently didn't like what she saw and sent me to get an ultrasound of my liver. A mass in my liver was seen on the ultrasound, but she told me not to panic, that sometimes masses are benign, and because I was experiencing no symptoms, she couldn't imagine it being anything at all. So off I went to get a biopsy of my liver, and then all of a sudden, I get a call from the oncologist's office. They wanted me to come in to talk about the mass they found and the results of the biopsy. I scheduled the appointment and went there alone because, in my mind, what healthy 29-year-old with no symptoms or ailments gets her physical every year, gets randomly diagnosed with cancer? I don't think there is another day in my life that I remember so vividly than entering that doctor's office and hearing the words, "It's cancer." There I sat in the exam room across from the doctor whose words changed my entire life. As he began explaining everything, he reached over to grab the tissue box and handed it to me. I declined the tissue with dry eyes and a racing mind. I don't remember the exact words he said, but when he finished, I simply said, "What do we do next?" My next step personally was to tell my family, my parents, and my siblings. Being 5 hours away from them, this was news I had to share over the phone. Outside of my family and a couple close friends, I told no one in those first 5 or 6 months. In that time, I began chemo because my mass was too large to surgically remove from my liver. I remember being devastated when they told me that I wasn't eligible for surgery, that my tumor was too big to remove from my body. How is that even a thing? So they started me on carboplatin and Gemzar, and every time I went in for chemo, one of my family members would drive the 5 hours to sit with me. Eventually, the side effects began, and I started to lose my hair. It was on a trip to DC with my sister that it really started to shed. I remember standing in the bathroom, combing my hair, and seeing so much of it fall to the floor or stay in the comb. When we returned home from that trip, I shaved my head and got 2 wigs. In the midst of chemo, however, I got an offer for a new job in a different city. I'd never thought to stop working while I went through treatments. Most days I felt fine, and the other days I just pushed through. I asked myself, do cancer patients change jobs in the middle of treatment? Will my health insurance coverage continue seamlessly? Will this new job be as accommodating of my Friday afternoons off for chemo? Do I want to have to find another doctor? I truly adored my doctor at Quincy Medical Group. Even though he gave me the worst news of my life, he was the most amazing oncologist to help me navigate my diagnosis, and I didn't want to leave Dr. Kaduru's care. Even with all that, I didn't want to put my career on hold either. I asked pertinent questions of my potential new employer and was pretty satisfied with the answers, and I also came to the conclusion that I would simply just drive the 2 hours to remain under the current care of my oncologist. So less than 6 months after my diagnosis, I moved to a different city and began a new job. And that energy is the reoccurring theme of my cancer journey. Cancer hasn't held me down. I have been getting up and pushing through for nearly 5 years. It took me a while, but I finally opened up to more people about my cancer diagnosis. And what drove me to do so was the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation and the network of people I connected to via Facebook who had the same rare cancer. I learned that in order for this cancer to get the attention from researchers and funders, More people need to know it exists. I receive an overwhelming amount of support from my friends and families, and even strangers, each one learning for the first time about this type of cancer. My journey has included a lot of different therapies. As I began with carboplatin and Gemzar and did that from August 2016 until May 2017, when my scan showed the giant tumor in my liver had responded incredibly well to the chemo and shrunk to an operable size. Surgery, a liver resection, was scheduled for May 22nd of 2017 at Barnes-Jewish Hospital with Dr. William Chapman, who had originally deemed my tumor inoperable. The liver resection was considered a success with clear margins and all of the tumor and about 60% of my liver removed. Despite the drains hanging out of my abdomen and the pain, I was so excited. I was on the road to beating this cancer. Before being released from the hospital, they told me they'd found histoplasmosis in my liver as well, which is a fungal infection that somehow got into my liver too. So I had a rare cancer and a rare fungal infection to boot. I always joked that I kept my doctors on their toes. After the resection, I began the Xeloda Gemzar regimen as an adjuvant treatment and the oral antifungal medicine itraconazole. I remained on the itraconazole and saw infectious disease doctor for nearly a year. But after about 6 months of the Xeloda and Gemzar, scans showed no more cancer in my body. After a little more than a year, it was over. I didn't have cancer anymore, or so I thought. The next set of scans 3 months later showed a little spot on my left lung. So my oncologist, Dr. Kaduru, suggested that we could do many things, but it was too small to do really anything about it at that time. So for the time being, we just watched it. And unfortunately, in November of that same year, the spot had grown and been joined by other spots over both lungs, which meant the war with cancer raged on. My oncologist suggested we try SBRT radiation therapy on the spots in my lungs, which to me sounded easier than chemo. Well, it turns out that did get rid of the spots, and I was back on the road to NED, which means no evidence of disease. So I continued on with my life, and guess what? I got a new job in a new city again. This time, though, I was moving even further from Dr. Kaduru, and I was sure I had to give up being in his care. So began the process of finding a new oncologist in my new town of Urbana, Illinois. I made the move here to not only start a new job, but to be closer to my partner who lived here in Urbana while I lived an hour and a half away in Springfield, Illinois. So in my new town, I saw a couple oncologists who were not so familiar with cholangio as I hoped they would be and treated my cancer very generally with very little results. I was still in contact with Dr. Kaduru, and he suggested I see a doctor he knew at Barnes Jewish. It's a 3-hour drive to St. Louis, but for knowledgeable medical care, it's worth the drive. I started seeing Dr. Monica Mean at Sideman Cancer Center, and she saw that I had tried all the chemos and began talking to me about clinical trials. We decided on my entering an immunotherapy trial, which included a hospital stay every week. And mind you, I was still working full time, volunteering in my community, and to top it all off, I had decided to run for local office. Yes, you heard that correct. I, the cancer patient, decided to run for office. I'll come back to that in a minute, though. Every week, I received an injection that would induce CRS or cytokine release syndrome, and what a storm it was inside my body. I got chills, high fevers, rigors, swelling, and pain at the injection site, but I endured because I always thought, what if this works? What if this gets rid of my cancer? But after 6 months, I failed out of the trial because the lung nodules were still growing. I had a mix of relief and worry. Relieved that I didn't have to experience CRS every week, but worried because what treatment was next. Then Dr. Amin introduced me to the newly FDA-approved Pemagadin or Pemazir. She told me the drug had seen great results in trials, so I was excited to begin. I've been on Pemazir since August 2020 and have been stable ever since. Throughout my journey, I've maintained a full-time job, as I said, volunteered in my community, and have successfully been elected as city council person. I share my journey with cholangiocarcinoma to give others hope, to show that there's no typical cancer patients, to help others survive. After my diagnosis in 2016, I looked up the survival rate of this cancer. 5 years. It was shocking and scary. But I told myself a lot could change in 5 years, and it has, in huge part, and thanks to the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation. There are more treatments, more research being done to ensure that more cholangio patients are surviving and thriving. Having cancer doesn't have to hold you down. Keep getting up and pushing through.